Esther is an 18-year-old Jewish girl. One day, her family takes her to a supermarket, but not for shopping. She's there to meet her future husband, as if she were a product on display. The men inspect her, and if one shows interest, she has no choice but to comply. It's her destiny to marry and bear children. Esther's match is successful, and under the guidance of her parents and elders, she meets her future husband for the first time. He appears shy and gentle, and Esther believes they'll have a happy life together. Excitedly, she begins planning the wedding. As a woman in her community, Esther's primary duties are to be a good wife and to please her husband in bed. She attentively takes notes as she learns how to fulfill these roles. In their tradition, newlyweds are only permitted to have intercourse on Friday nights. Esther learns that she must be clean before engaging in marital relations. After her menstrual cycle, she must use a white cloth to check herself daily until she is deemed clean for 7 consecutive days. Only then can she enter the ritual bath and be ready to sleep with her husband. In the following lessons, Esther learns about the female body. With her teacher's guidance, she explores her body for the first time, hoping it will help her on her wedding night. Busy with these new lessons, Esther finally arrives at her wedding day. Dressed in a pristine white gown, she sits among the crowd as the lengthy ceremony drags on. Finally, after what feels like an eternity, her groom, Yankee, is led to her with his eyes closed. Under the watchful eyes of everyone, he opens them to place a white veil over Esther's head. The ceremony continues as he places the wedding ring on her finger, symbolically binding her life to the Orthodox Jewish customs, where a woman becomes her husband's possession. Naive and hopeful, Esther doesn't understand the weight of these traditions. Her small hands touch Yankee's, bringing their hearts closer together. But after the joyous occasion, reality sets in. The first thing Yankee's family does is shave off Esther's hair, as they believe a woman's hair can tempt men and that it must be removed to ensure loyalty to her husband. As her hair falls away, Esther sobs uncontrollably, but she knows she can't resist. It's an age-old custom passed down for generations. Now bald, Esther prepares for her first night with her husband. She nervously undresses and lies on the bed, waiting for Yankee. Neither of them has any experience, and their clumsy attempts lead to Esther getting hurt. Their wedding night is a failure. The following week, they try to consummate their marriage but fail repeatedly. Frustrated, Yankee confides in his mother, and Esther realizes that her husband is a complete mama's boy. With her mother-in-law's involvement, their attempts become even more difficult, and Yankee begins to criticize Esther for being too delicate. He compares her to his brother's wives, who didn't have such issues. Some even had children just 9 months after their wedding. Esther feels more and more pressure. Exhausted and desperate, Esther turns to her aunt for comfort, but finds no understanding. She quits her piano lessons and seeks help from a specialist, who tests her anxiety levels and finds them off the charts. The expert tells her that their marital issues stem from her nervousness and teaches her relaxation techniques, giving her tools to help. Esther diligently follows the advice, but the exercises only make her lose interest in sex altogether. By now, they've been married almost a year, and Yankee has lost all patience. He insists they must succeed this time. Despite her anxiety, Esther tries to go through with it, but after another failed attempt, their arguments grow more intense. Yankee demands that she lie down and allow him to finish. Feeling like a fish on a chopping board, Esther submits, and Yankee finally consummates the marriage, smiling in satisfaction. Esther's silent tears are deafening. A month later, on the Sabbath, Esther finds herself surrounded by other women, all with children in their arms. They bombard her with pregnancy tips, but all Esther feels is nausea and the need to escape. When she realizes her period is late, she buys a pregnancy test and discovers she is indeed pregnant. For a moment, she thinks all her suffering was worth it. But when Yankee returns home, Esther is eager to share the good news, only to be cut off by him. He tells her that his mother has decided they should separate. The words die in her throat, and without shedding a tear, Esther decides to leave this suffocating home. Gathering her savings, she leaves without looking back, avoiding familiar faces and heading to her piano teacher's house. There, she collects her passport and boards a plane to Berlin in search of freedom. Having never traveled outside New York and with no formal education, Esther has no one to turn to except her mother, who abandoned her years ago. She rings her mother's doorbell, but no one answers. With nowhere else to go, Esther waits at the doorstep, hoping, eventually, she spots her mother, but just as she is about to approach her, she notices another woman by her side, her mother's partner. Shocked, Esther turns and flees. In a foreign land, Esther has no place to go. She wanders the streets aimlessly, eventually running into a young man carrying a large amount of coffee. Out of kindness or perhaps boredom, she offers to help him and ends up at a local music school. Surrounded by students her age who are full of life, Esther is reminded of her own pain and loss, and tears stream down her face. After the rehearsal, Esther gathers the courage to compliment the students, expressing how beautiful their performance was. One of them invites her to join them at a nearby lake. When they arrive, Esther is amazed to see people, young and old, confidently enjoying their bodies without shame. Encouraged by a girl, Esther takes a deep breath, removes her conservative clothing, and slowly walks into the lake. As the water rises to her chest, she removes her wig and lets it float away, finally feeling free. Back in New York, Yankee returns home to find Esther gone. After searching all night, he reluctantly turns to his parents for help. His mother, thrilled by the news, insists that they should have divorced her long ago. She convinces Yankee to accept this decision, but when his rebellious cousin hears about it, he offers to help find Esther. However, with Esther having left everything behind, they have no leads. Yankee's cousin, with more experience in the outside world, decides to take matters into his own hands. He suspects Esther's piano teacher might know something, and after some forceful persuasion, they learn that Esther has fled to Berlin to find her mother. The two men immediately board a plane to Germany. Meanwhile, Esther, with no place to stay, sneaks back into the music school and spends the night under a table in the rehearsal room. The next morning, she is discovered by a janitor who reports her to a professor. Sensing her distress, the professor invites Esther for breakfast, where she nervously nibbles on a sandwich before running outside, overcome with emotion. The professor's kindness opens Esther's heart, and she shares her past with him. He encourages her to apply for a special education program at the school that would cover her tuition and living expenses. With his help, Esther submits the application and lists her mother's address as her contact information, as she still has nowhere else to go. Determined to start anew, Esther visits a local store and tries on jeans like the other students, but her slightly rounded belly reminds her that she is different. Meanwhile, Yankee and his cousin arrive in Berlin. On the way to their hotel, Yankee notices his cousin's smartphone and innocently asks if it could help him find Esther. Amused by Yankee's naivety, his cousin humors him while continuing to play a game on his phone. Despite their differences, the two manage to check into the hotel, where Yankee immediately covers up a provocative painting with a white cloth and puts on his traditional Hasidic garb to pray. Afterwards, Yankee's cousin convinces him to dress in more modern clothes and even gives him a baseball cap to help blend in. Uncomfortable in this new environment, Yankee insists on bringing the gun his mother gave him for protection, feeling reassured by its weight. Their first stop is Esther's mother's house, but when they ring the doorbell, she denies knowing Esther's whereabouts. Frustrated, Yankee follows his cousin aimlessly, unsure of what to do next. His cousin, unbothered, takes him to a local nightclub and encourages him to let loose. But when a woman approaches Yankee, he refuses to touch her, remaining faithful to his wife. However, remembering Esther's words, Yankee asks the woman how to please a woman. Touched by his innocence, she begins to teach him gently. Leaving the nightclub, Yankee confronts his cousin, reminding him of their true purpose in Berlin, to find Esther. But his cousin remains indifferent, more interested in his phone. Angry and frustrated, Yankee accuses him of wasting time, and they part ways after an argument. Meanwhile, with the professor's help, Esther begins attending music classes as an assistant, where she learns more about music and meets like-minded friends. They invite her to a dinner party, and for the first time, Esther begins to let her guard down, even offering to cook some traditional Jewish dishes. But the mood is dampened when a girl recognizes Esther and accuses her of being a runaway, leaving her feeling embarrassed and exposed. After a brief silence, Esther bravely shares her story with the group. Her honesty wins them over, and they accept her with open arms. Feeling more at ease, Esther offers to play a piano piece, but her lack of formal training is evident. Her performance is met with mixed reactions, but one girl bluntly tells her that she isn't good enough to get into the conservatory. Esther flees the room, her confidence shattered. The world outside her community is harsh and unforgiving. Desperate for comfort, she calls home, but her grandmother hangs up on her, fearing the consequences of being associated with her rebellious granddaughter. Feeling utterly lost, Esther decides to withdraw her application from the conservatory. However, when she arrives at the office, she learns that her interview has already been scheduled. With no other options, she reluctantly agrees to go through with it. Desperate to find a job and support herself in Berlin, Esther searches for work but struggles to find anything suitable. Wandering the streets, she stumbles upon a church choir and listens to their uplifting voices, finding a glimmer of hope. Meanwhile, Esther's mother receives the conservatory's interview letter, revealing her daughter's whereabouts. At the same time, Yankee's cousin, feeling guilty about their earlier fight, breaks into Esther's mother's house and finds the interview invitation. He takes a photo of the time and location, planning to intercept Esther. Returning home from work, Esther's mother discovers signs of the break-in and realizes that her daughter is in danger. She rushes to warn Esther, but it's too late. Yankee and his cousin are already on their way to confront her. As Esther leaves the conservatory after her interview, she is ambushed by Yankee and his cousin. They take her to a park, a place with a dark history of Jewish persecution, and confront her about raising their child in Berlin. When Esther remains silent, Yankee's cousin, enraged, pulls out a gun and places it between them. Realizing the dire situation, Esther is reminded of her mother's words and finds the strength to stand her ground. Her cousin's intimidation tactics fail, and he eventually leaves, but not without warning her of the consequences of her actions. That night, Esther returns to her mother's house, broken and desperate. For the first time, she breaks down in tears, confessing that she is pregnant and has nothing to offer her child. Her mother reassures her, reminding her that love is enough. In the midst of their conversation, Esther confronts her mother about abandoning her as a child. Her mother finally reveals the painful truth. She never wanted to leave Esther, but her abusive husband and his powerful family forced her to give up custody. For years, she has lived with the pain of being separated from her daughter. As Esther begins to understand her mother's choices, she slowly forgives her and accepts her new life in Berlin. The next day, her mother helps her prepare for the conservatory interview, dressing her in a beautiful dress and walking her to the school. During the interview, Esther decides to sing instead of playing the piano. She bravely stands before the panel of judges and sings a traditional Jewish song, telling her story through the music. Her voice is filled with sadness and strength, touching the hearts of everyone in the room, including Yankee, who is watching from the back. After the performance, Yankee approaches Esther and, in a desperate attempt to win her back, cuts off his side locks, a significant gesture in their community. Esther is moved to tears, but remains resolute. She walks out of the hotel with her head held high, determined to start a new life. As she walks through the streets of Berlin, Esther is no longer lost. She is ready to embrace her freedom and pursue her dreams. In the eyes of the Hasidic community, she may be a rebel, but in reality, she is a warrior, a woman who simply wants the same rights and freedoms as everyone else. She is not wrong for wanting to live her life on her own terms.